In this video, I am going to show you how I use my new Brother LX3014 sewing machine to machine sew Knitting Nancy knitting doll spool knit circles. They start as strings, they end up as circles, to a piece of backing fabric, which I am then also going to put another backing on, and this is going to be a small rug. And I've been working on this for a while because I do a lot of spool knitting, and yet sometimes I have a pile of the circles and I just haven't added them to the project. Most of the time I sew them by hand. But I would like to get this done, and I would like to be able to do this quickly. Not only with this project, but I have several placemats here that I actually had made with my Singer 500A sewing machine. And I had put decorative stitching on them. But the thread that I used for the decorative stitching was not color fast. So they've kind of bled. The red has bled into the white of the placemat. And so what I'm going to do is use those as fabric backings for Knitting Nancy circles. And with that, I'll end up with a fabric that's quite wild and a little bit puffy that I can make things out of. I can make bags. I can use this as a placemat, or I was going to say a table runner or a centerpiece area. And depending on the yarns you use, I'm using up leftover yarns from other projects. But you could do one all in, white Angora and have an absolutely beautiful centerpiece for your table. This is going to be a rug, so I'm using heavier wools, acrylic blends, anything I have that I think will hold up to being walked on. And here are some Knitting Nancy's, just to explain how this whole process goes. Here are some knitting dolls, Knitting Nancy's. And what I do is use them to spool knit strings of yarn, which then get sewn into circles by hand. And I try to make sure that I match the thread for the most part, so that when you have, like in this, I probably used white thread, but you don't really want the thread showing up, depending on how you're going to use them. Since these are going on a rug, that's not all that important. And then what I had bought to back this with is a rubber shelf liner, and this was actually at a CVS store for $1, and I'm not sure how long it is, 5 feet by 12 inches. So I'll have a lot of this. The other good use for this is when you're machine quilting, you can cut little squares of this stuff and use them as little grippers to grip the fabric as you move it through a machine. But I bought this piece specifically to back this rug that I'm making. So what I'm going to do today in this video is show you two ways of attaching the circles to a backing fabric with this machine. Some of them on this, you can see I've zigzagged around here. And again, this is kind of going to be just a rug that I throw around. So I'm sorry, the battery in the camera died. And I was saying that I'm not really concerned that I had used black thread to zigzag around this, because this is just going to be a rug that I throw on the floor. And that's one method I'm going to do with the machine today. And the other method is just sewing them on in a cross fashion. Here's a piece that I had actually done on a little portable machine, and you can see the stitching on the back. all I did, instead of going around and zigzagging it on there, all I did was do one direction and the other direction. And that holds it in place. Even though this lifts up, that holds it in place. So I may start to zigzag and then do many of them like this. They're still going to stay on the fabric and you can still walk on the rug. Some of the bulkier ones, circles, might actually make you trip. So I guess you have to decide what application you'd be using this for, and one thing to do would be to put them in place with just two directions like this, and then go back and zigzag any areas that are sticking up too far. So this is what I'm going to do today in this video, and let's get started. I've started sewing a few of the circles in place, and I want to show you a couple of things. First of all, I have several weights of yarn here. This is worsted weight, this is bulky weight, this is a cotton sport weight, this is worsted, another sport weight, and this is a hand spun that came out about sport weight. Now, in the few that I've just sewn in a few minutes, you're going to find, if you do this, that you're going to run into different issues with them. Worsted weight is the easiest. Worsted or sport weight are the easiest to sew in place. Not because the machine can't handle the bulky fabric. It can. But if you look at this one got annoying because it was a very nice circle. And at first I did just the cross design, and because it's bulky, the center yarn got pushed out of place. So then I actually did another line down the center. In other words, these are hand sewn, some of them. I think this one is hand sewn and then zigzagged around that edge. And you can see, if you want that effect and not that effect, then you either want to do zigzag around the edges so that you're not anywhere near the center, or you want to hand sew them. And hand sewing, of course, probably everybody realizes, gives you much more control in some ways over the way the finished item looks. But it takes, for me to sew on about 10 of average size circles, it takes like an hour and a half to sew on 10, because it's like doing hand embroidery work. It's time consuming. And I would like to get these on there for this. So this one is secure now, and it's on there, but this is what I was talking about before, where you might trip over that one. This is another one I just added, and that is a worsted weight yarn, but you can see that because it overlaps, it's going to stick up a little bit. Now, I have all different size circles because if you use all large circles, they're not going to fit together exactly. If I put a large circle there and another large circle next to it, you're going to have gaps. So you can either leave those gaps, depending on the fabric you have as your foundation fabric, or you can move this over a little bit and squish one of these in there. And as you stitch this with the machine, you can move them closer still and really squish them in like that. And that way you'll end up with a completely covered foundation fabric. Now this is one that I just did with both a straight stitch cross, I did it 3 times actually, just straight stitch across the center, and it didn't lose its shape too much. And then I went around the edge in zigzag, and I'm I know you can't see it because the camera is blurry, but I'll show you in a moment. I have, for the zigzag, I have the tension on either 2 or 3, depending on what yarn I'm using. With the worsted weight yarns, I'm having it on 3. With the very bulky yarns, I use 2. And I have the machine stitch on 2, which is the smallest zigzag stitch right there. So right now I'm doing zigzag. That's what I have the machine set up for, is zigzag. Zigzag of worsted weight yarn. So let me grab one of those, and I'm going to set the camera up at the back of the machine so you can see how this goes as I do it. Okay, I have the camera at the back of the machine, and because this is a slightly narrow project, I can fit it under here without a problem. One fun thing about this whole project is that when you use different color yarns, you can get creative about where you put what colors, what circles. Now see, this is what I meant where, I just want to check if you can see that. If I put the blue circle where I have it, there will be a gap big enough for a small circle next to it. And I can either push the blue circle as close as I can get it, or I can leave it the way it is. Now the other thing is, I thought I had a problem with my machine when I was doing one of the bulky ones, because I had the presser bar lever up like that, and for some reason that felt like the down position. Now I have been doing some cotton quilting, and so I'm used to a tighter presser, but so I kept thinking, oh, I have to pick this up, and then it was dropping like that, and I was afraid I had broken the machine because I couldn't understand why this wouldn't stay where it was supposed to be. Well, it turns out I didn't have the presser foot down after all. So now I just want you to be aware of that on this machine, that there are actually 3 positions to the presser bar lever, and the uppermost position doesn't stay in place, only the other 2 do. And what I'm going to do now is a zigzag stitch around this blue circle. Get my foot pedal in place. And this really leaves the center shape intact and firmly puts the circle down to the foundation fabric. When you get close to another circle, you can either overlap it and go through all the layers, or you can fit it in and reshape the circle. In this case, I'm going to fit it in next to it. Sure the fabric doesn't get in the way. Let me just turn this a little bit and get that fabric down out of the way. I back up at the end of each one, and I'll show you the detail on that stitching in a moment. But this, I'm going to lift the needle to the highest position. I'm going to grab the next circle, and because I'm working with worsted weight, the next one is going to be worsted weight or less. So what you can do is move right to the next circle without lifting the fabric or fiddling with the bobbin or anything like that. On this machine, that's also, I haven't yet used this for a lot of short seam quilting. A lot of, some quilting, you're constantly moving the fabric and maybe carrying the two threads to the next square and quilting, and if you have trouble with the bobbin thread when you do that, that becomes a problem. I haven't done that yet with this machine, but I do know that if the bobbin thread gets loopy in any way, then the machine basically stops. You have a real problem getting it to do anything if the bobbin thread gets loopy. So this is why you can go from one circle to the next circle using zigzag. Now the only thing, and this isn't a problem when I don't have a camera on, but the only issue is you're moving the fabric around quite a bit to go around the circle, which isn't really an issue, like I said, unless you have a camera going. Now that's two circles, and what I can now do is just get to the next open space and do another one. Now this one is a heavier yarn. This gold yarn is Vanna's Choice. It might be a it's a worsted weight, but it might be one of her that brand's craft yarns. So it's heavier than, say, this is Lion Brand Woolies, and this is Fisherman Wool. But so this is heavier, even though it's still a single strand worsted. And you can see the heavier the yarn, the more you have a little bit of resistance as you move it around, because the yarn is bumping up against the foot. And also you can see I picked up a blue yarn thread, which I'm just going to trim because otherwise it's going to drag everywhere. And this is where I don't really want to move the needle and the bobbin and start again. I'd rather just keep sewing. So that one thread, that one strand of the yarn, I trim off. don't know what that was. And then after I do a few of those, I do a reverse stitch and pull it out and see what it looks like. Now, what these are coming out like is similar to those I had done before that were zigzagged in black. And I'll show you the detail of the stitching in a moment. I want to show you the other way to do this first. And I'm going to use a bulky weight. Oh, I don't know what that was. The noise was the camera fell over. I'm very sorry. I'm going to leave this going, even though that happened, and I am sorry. I'm going to use a bulky weight circle, and I'm going to do the cross method and show you how the yarn gets pushed around. So I'm resetting the machine tension to 2, and I'm going to use number 10 for the stitch length. And this is where, see, that almost looks like or feels like the presser foot is down, but it isn't. It's in the up position. That's where it's down, and automatically I get puffiness in front of where I'm going. So let's see how this goes. And even though the toes on this particular foot go up at the end, this is what you have to be very careful of and aware of with a bulky weight yarn like this. And now what I'll do is I'll back up to the center and turn it. Now there is enough room. Let's see, this is almost too bulky. It's almost too bulky to do it this way. So here we go, where we're going to move the fabric and everything and hope the bobbin thread travels well. And when you're pulling this, because you have a bulky yarn, it happened again, and I'm very sorry. Let me hit pause. I've moved the camera to the left side. I don't think it's going to fall over without me noticing it anyway. And I'm very sorry about that. I don't do this professionally. I do this to share how I do things. So I have now moved the needle and thread back to the center of the bulky circle. I've gone one straight stitch length across the center, across the entire circle. And now I really need to go in the other direction. So I need to continue moving this until I get it to the other edge of the circle, right there. And it's really only the bulky weight yarns that are this awkward to work with. Anything less than a bulky weight like this does not give you a hard time with this. And that, you can see that I had my both yarns, what I'm calling traveling to the new position, which in a lot of sewing you do often. And that is this machine saying, wait a minute, I'm not sure I want to do this. And if it weren't bulky yarn, I don't think I'd even have that issue. And you can hear how the machine sounds different. So what I'm going to do, because it's continuing, I'm going to take this out of there and see if the bobbin thread is coming out fine. So it's not tangled in the bobbin case. But because of that noise, when I check the bottom of it, there is a bunch of bobbin loops. So the best thing to do, I guess, is not to travel with the threads on a bulky circle in this project, and to end your thread, move to the next circle completely, and start new. For the most part, I'm using worsted weight yarns anyway, because most knitting dolls only handle worsted weight or lighter weight than that. It's one of my supersized knitting spools that I make the bulky with, so maybe I even hand sew the bulky. But I'll continue doing the cross on this one, and we'll just see how you can do it. Now, if I were doing all bulkies, I would have to stop here, remove this, and move to the next one completely. It seems more difficult to travel from one place to another when you have a very thick fabric. But let's try. I've got a little worsted weight circle that I want to put in here. And let's just see how this works with just using the straight stitch across the center of the circle. Then I move to the center, and because this one's only about 1.5 inches in diameter, I can back up and use reverse probably, or I can just pick the needle up and reposition a little better. But that's the same thing I was just doing. So from what I'm seeing here, both for the way it looks and for ease of using the machine to do this, the zigzag stitch around the edges is the easiest way to do this. Now that, I got an extra loop when I was in reverse, and it looks like the thread may have broken. So as I just said, I think the easiest way to do this is a zigzag stitch around the edges of each circle. And now I can tell my bobbin thread is caught. So let me hit pause again, and I'm going to take that off of there. Now, as you can see, I had to actually turn the machine off, rethread it, and now I'm picking up the bobbin thread again. The bobbin thread itself wasn't a problem, but the upper thread had gotten caught underneath. I'm going to try and get the bobbin thread out of there. And once I do this, I'm going to continue sewing the circles onto the backing fabric. And when I get that done, I will show you how I then am going to attach the rubberized as really another backing to the whole thing when it's done. But before I do that, let me show you the detail. Here are the zigzag stitches around the edge of the blue one. I'm using white thread, and I think you can see that you can see them. But also, because I'm using a setting of 2, and the smallest zigzag stitch, once I get all of those on there, the yarn is going to puff up with use and wear and probably cover a lot of that. This is the bulky mess, and it is on there. You can see it's on there, but I don't like the way it looks, so I will probably either go across it again and get it more fastened down, or go around it at least with zigzag. And there's the little blue one, and I have to do the same thing with. So overall, those that look the best are these with zigzagging around the edges. And again, I apologize for the camera falling over. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew the circles that I have done to this, and then show you more about putting the backing on the back. I want to show you how I ended up finishing this spool-knit rug project. And I'm not sure now whether it's going to be a rug or whether it's going to be a wall hanging or a table centerpiece. I may use it in different areas. I finished zigzagging all the different circles in place. And then I did need to do a little bit of handwork. For example, this is the bulky maroon that was really loose and sticking up and didn't look well. So what I did was use a hand needle and thread and just come up from the bottom, grab a few threads and go back down, and more or less tack it down a little bit better in place. So that's what the finished item looks like. And the Brother LX3014 really did well, considering most of the yarns, well, the only yarns I had a problem with were the bulkies. And that was really because these were loose knit on top of it. They weren't a tight knit bulky. And worsted weight and smaller is not a problem at all for the machine. Now, the next step that I did was I trimmed that rubber shelf lining to match the back of the piece with the printed side up, which I had ended up with some black bobbin thread that was there. And whether this is a rug or a wall hanging or a table centerpiece, no one's going to see that anyway, but this, with the printed side up, it hides it just a little bit more. And then I was going to machine stitch that in place, and I may still do that, but I ended up just, again, by hand with a needle and thread, doing a simple running stitch on every edge through the rubber. And I did that for two reasons. I wasn't sure how sewing through the rubber was going to go with the machine. I mean, it's a very soft rubber, but I didn't know what that would do to the needle, and I wasn't sure that if I did that for, say, one side, like on this side, these are mostly worsted weight yarns. Some of them, like this is a bulky, I would have been coming through the other side through rubber. And then I wanted to tell you the foundation cloth I used is called Fiddler's Cloth. It's a cross-stitch fabric. So I would have been going through rubber, the Fiddler's Cloth, and then a bulky weight yarn without using a ballpoint needle for knitted items. So I figured it's just as easy to hand sew the rubber backing on, which is what I did. So there is the project, and I am going to be doing this again, and I'll be using the Brother LX3014 to zigzag the circles in place. And so the next one won't have some of the crossway stitching that you see, and it'll look more like this. And that is closer to what it looks like when you sew them on by hand. Even though you can see here, here's black zigzagging around it, but the actual circle looks closer to what it looks like when you sew it on by hand. So there is my spool knit project.